Good evening and welcome to Bugajski Hour. I am happy to be back in Tirana to analyze the news and to examine important global, regional and local developments that affect the lives of all Albanians, both inside and outside Albania. I will be answering questions from our studio audience and also asking tough questions with an important political personality. Our guest today on the Bugajski hot seat is the head of Albania's Socialist Party and leader of the political opposition, Edi Rama. But first, I will give you my monthly overview of America's perspective on the world. What is Washington thinking? My subject today is the increasingly dangerous confrontation between America and Iran. No one can be certain whether the current conflict between the US and Iran will lead to military confrontation, but the ingredients for armed conflict are certainly present. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency has asserted that Iran is developing nuclear weapons. If American intelligence confirms that the nuclear program is close to meeting its objectives, then the fuse to war will be dramatically shortened. In pressuring Tehran to desist from its nuclear program, the US is at the forefront of tough new international sanctions, targeting Iran's ability to be paid for oil exports. In response, Iran threatens to choke off the Hormuz Straits, through which vital oil supplies are transported to the West. The European Union is also adopting an oil embargo, ensuring that Tehran's financial situation will further deteriorate. Iranian armed forces have conducted several war games, including firing live missiles in the Hormuz Straits and adjacent waters of the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Last month, 3 armed patrol boats of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard came within several hundred yards of a US amphibious assault ship. Despite US warnings that any interference with international traffic through Hormuz would not be tolerated, such provocations can easily lead to miscalculation and escalation. Tehran claims that covert military action against the state is also increasing. In mid-January, an Iranian nuclear scientist was assassinated, and the government blamed Israel and the United States, claiming it was the 4th nuclear scientist murdered in the past 2 years. Some Iranians have called for retaliatory killings, but any such assassination could trigger a mobilization for war. And with parliamentary elections scheduled for March, Iran's rulers may seek to display their strength towards the perennial American enemy. Tehran also faces the prospect that Syria, its closest Middle East ally, is edging towards civil war that could oust the regime of Bashar al-Assad. This would change the balance of power in the Middle East and undermine other Iranian allies, including Hezbollah. Having extricated itself from Iraq and planning to evict US troops from Afghanistan, the Obama administration does not seek a war with Iran. But a provocative act such as the sinking of a US warship would force the president's hand. During an election year, with Republicans claiming that he is soft on defense, this could propel Obama to order an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. Growing tensions in the Hormuz Straits will, of course, have a direct impact on global oil supplies and escalate conflicts between Iran and the Gulf states. The latter have offered to provide any additional crude needed by the global market if Iranian supplies are blocked. Tehran has condemned the offer as a hostile act and issued warnings to all Gulf producers. One additional destabilizing factor is the potential Israeli response to Iran's nuclear capabilities. US officials have expressed fears that Israel plans to strike Iran's nuclear facilities if Washington is unsuccessful in halting the nuclear program. Israeli officials consider a nuclear-armed Iran as an existential threat and have hinted at military action should sanctions prove ineffective. We are certainly living on the edge in the Middle East. to test the Bugajski hot seat. And our special guest today is the leader of the political opposition and head of the Socialist Party, Edi Rama. Welcome to the show. There is no need... That's for you, not for me. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being with me this evening. I'm going to jump straight into the questions. There's no need for long introductions. And let me begin with a very basic question that is of particular interest in the United States and I would say throughout the European Union. And the question is this. Given the persistent charges by the opposition about alleged electoral fraud, political centralization, and even the deliberate shooting of demonstrators, as we saw with the tragic events last year, the idea that Albania is not a full democracy, or that it's a faltering democracy, or that potentially it's a failing democracy. How would you answer such observations?
I would say that Albania is a dysfunctional democracy, and this is something that is proven not only by the events you mentioned, but also in the everyday life of people. Because not only in terms of institutions and in terms of governance by the big G, but also in terms of everyday life, Albania is a dysfunctional democracy.
Dysfunctional meaning, has it been a democracy and is failing to keep up to initial expectations? Or is it part of the growth phase of a post-communist system?
I think 20 and a bit more years are too many to say that this is part of the growth in terms of seeking for a functioning democracy. I think Albania has had and still has freedom, but this freedom has been threatened in major terms or in minor terms during these 20 and a bit more years. So I cannot say that it has been a really functioning democracy and now it is a dysfunctional one. But I can say without doubt that it has been a much better functioning democracy than it is.
So where does the responsibility lie?
I think that if we take it as a whole process for the whole society, for the whole political spectrum, it might be a shared responsibility from the citizen in the bottom to everybody up. But if we take it as part of a path in which, as I said before, we didn't succeed to build a strong functioning democracy, and now we are facing with a kind of degrade even of what we had before, for sure the responsibility lies completely on the shoulders of the government.
Well, let me ask you, I interviewed the Prime Minister in my last show, my first show, and his point was that the opposition was planning some sort of a coup on the events of January the 21st. I mean, how would you respond to that charge? And would the Socialist Party, would you take any responsibility for the events of that time, of the tragic events of January the 21st?
I think a year was enough to prove the one or the other version. And proofs are screaming out of the responsibility of the government in the people killings, and also in what is happening with the investigation, which, thanks to the support of the United States government and the FBI, has made some important progress, but at the same time has been obstructed wildly by the government. On the other hand, yes, the demonstration degraded in some street violence, which was basically a reaction towards very unneeded provocation of the police forces. But the investigation has gone on also in this direction. Many protesters have been investigated, sued, and even punished, but there is no proof to give any kind of credit to the Prime Minister's version. The Prime Minister's version is just a very bad photocopy of what we have heard before in the old regime times about inner forces trying to sabotage the glorious Communist Party and its own government.
But will you accept the results of the investigation, the current investigation?
We have seen it going on, and for a while we were very much wondering that this was going on only on one side, meaning investigating and sending in front of the judges the protesters. But even in that period, we never counteracted politically to undermine or to stop the investigation. And today we can say proudly that we accepted with all our goodwill also the request of the General Prosecutor to go on deeper by calling the lift of immunity for 3 of our members of the Parliament, and we'll do so even if others will be needed. For us, it's a matter of the truth, only of the truth, and of nothing else than the truth.
Before I ask you more about the Socialist Party, let me ask you a question about Albania's qualifications or lack thereof for entering the European Union. You know, given these problems that you mention, many European officials charge both parties with engaging in partisan politics, in polarizing, contributing to polarizing the Albanian public. How would you respond to those sort of charges?
I've never been happy with that because I don't think that the term shared responsibilities can be used to equalize the responsibilities. Of course, as I said before, in a process like that, which is a major historical process and which has to do with a dramatic change for a society like ours, everybody has his or her own responsibility, even a normal citizen. But no one can pretend that this responsibility is of the same level. The government is the main responsible, and the government should be held responsible for this delay and for the more than one failure of Albania to get the candidate status.
But in terms of qualifying for the European Union, presumably in Parliament you will be willing to cooperate with the coalition government to push through legislation that is, and other decisions that are vital for Albania to qualify for candidacy.
Absolutely, but as the experience in other countries coming out from the communist past showed very well, as your own experience in America shows very well, when it comes to building up consensus and getting the opposition on the board, is the majority who tries hard and who find the ways of compromising. So if we see the efforts of President Obama in this direction, trying to reach out and to get the other side vote for his bills, it's the crystal clear example that you cannot stay in your own positions and say, I can do anything because the opposition does not want to join. This is impossible, and this is absolutely not the way to see it.
Politics is the art of compromise.
And for sure, compromise is the art of them who has the power and who have the power and who are ready to do something with the power by sharing the responsibilities.
Well, let me ask you specifically about your party, about the Socialist Party. Why should Albanian voters support the Socialist Party during the next elections? In other words, how does your program differ from the other parties, particularly from the Democrat?
Albanians should, first of all, and in my view, without any conditionality, get rid of this government, because today they are less secure in their own life, strictly speaking. It's enough to see the skyrocketing criminality figures to understand that today in Albania, no one can be secure, can be safe. Second, because everyone is suffering the wrong policies and also the weakening of the state institutions in his or her own family life. And also because today Albanians can buy less and should pay more. So in general, politically, socially, economically, there are all the reasons to say this government has failed and that we need change, we need a new politics, we need a new government for a new beginning with a completely different behavior towards the citizens, towards the institutions, towards the constitution and the laws, and of course with different and completely refreshing policies. And in our program, which we have named an Albanian Renaissance, we try to address exactly the priorities of every family, of every ordinary Albanian, through policies that will change radically things in different important aspects, starting from the need of redistribution of the burden that today people are obliged to share in terms of taxes, and then going on with new economic policies for more investments that will produce more jobs, and for a different healthcare system, and for sure for a different education system.
Well, specifically on the taxation side, what is it that you are proposing?
We think that the flat tax is a pure abuse, and we think that it is absolutely unjust that who gain less pay more, and who gain more pay less. So we want to introduce the progressive tax, and we want to give to everybody the opportunity to contribute, but based on his or her own revenues, not on a flat tax that in fact is an increase of inequality and also an engine of polarization that Albania cannot stand.
Mm. Well, let me ask you, maybe we can go back to the program in a minute, but another question about political parties, including your party. I'm often asked in Washington, how do political parties work in Albania? How internally democratic are these parties? Who are the deputies of the leaders in these parties? How would you respond to those sort of questions?
I think that this is a question that can be responded in different ways, but coming from Washington, this is a question that will be responded straightforward by saying there is nothing so different than the today's Republican Party or that even the Democratic Party, if it comes to our own party, the Socialist Party. Of course, there is a difference between parties here. And everybody knows that in the Socialist Party, we might have still to improve our democratic mechanisms. We might still have to improve the communication between people inside the party in all ranks, but for sure we have a party where everybody can say what he or she thinks, and we have a party that by default nourishes the media with its own inner debates. On the other side, we have a party that is only one person, and from where there is no news since long, long times.
So you're drawing a distinction between Democrats and Socialists in terms of internal organization?
It's not the distinction I draw, it's the distinction everybody knows. Everybody see, everybody touch, and since a long time ago. So the Socialist Party is a party that has in its own DNA the need for the inner debate. And I think our problem is to improve it and to make of it the best for the people interested, because sometimes this goes in directions that are not very interesting for people, are not very much important for the society itself. This is our problem.
I was going to say, would you say there is sufficient public involvement in politics, in political debate in Albania?
I don't think so. Unfortunately, this is one of the bad signs that anyone can see and can feel after 6 years of Mr. Berisha's government. Because if we compare the level of participation of the civil society and of individuals in the public debate today and 6 years ago, there is no comparison. If we compare the way the youth was involved 6 years ago to promote change and the complete empty space left because of a government that is more and more acting like a regime on fear and pressure, there is no possible comparison. So I think what we miss more and more is exactly the public participation and the participation in the debate of other stakeholders than the political parties.
And I gather your party, the Socialist Party, is at the forefront of the social media in terms of Facebook and Twitter and all these. I have my certain doubts about the effectiveness of conveying complex political programs through instant messaging. How do you visualize this social media and its impact on Albanian politics?
It cannot replace the traditional communication, but it can be a very valuable added value. And I think facts are proving it, because there is easy, there is cost-free, and there is very fast when you have to convey a message, which of course is not a political program, but it can very well be a statement for a determined moment of the day.
Well, a related question would be, looking across the Albanian political spectrum, and in particular any new movements and parties that emerge, what is your view of the Red and Black Alliance? Is this a movement that can become an effective third force in politics? And can it attract many of, as you said, some of these alienated young people who are, let's say, fed up, frustrated with the political structure, maybe frustrated with both political parties? Is this a movement that we should be watching?
First of all, I think this is a movement coming as an expression of anger and discontent on the right wing, but is also a movement that can attract young people with no points of reference in a situation in which, as I said, the public debate is impoverished day after day, the pressure is rising day after day, the fear of consequences that everybody has in terms of whatever level of life is growing day by day. So I would not like to see Albanians take this trip out of the lack of alternatives and out of anger, because we know very well where this anger then can bring. So yes, there is a possibility, but I see it mostly as discontent and anger on the right wing.
But is there a potential nationalist element in such a movement? In other words, one that can draw upon national, ethno-national feelings, maybe even expansionist feelings, feelings of grievance in the Albanian political, amongst the Albanian public?
Let's face it, we live in a reality in which there are some new elements of expressing frustration, of expressing discontent, of expressing the need for change. And part of these new elements is also nationalism. Economy, of course, is not helping to prevent it. Poverty is not helping to prevent it. Lack of perspective for many young people that are unemployed or will face unemployment after finishing universities or so-called universities is a kind of good food for this. But I think the alternative is elsewhere. The alternative is to change by never forgetting that Albania needs to join Europe, and Europe is our common destiny, and we should be part of the European Union as full members, as first-hand citizens of Europe, not just as second-hand citizens of Europe, because this goes together, and without the one cannot be the other.
Mr. Rama, we need to stop for an advert break. We'll be back shortly. One of the questions that tends to disqualify Albania from future accession to the European Union is the perceived high level of corruption in Albania. Would you say that the situation is getting better or worse? Would you say that the government is mishandling it, not putting enough emphasis on it, and how would you handle it if you were Prime Minister?
Unfortunately, although I'm biased because I'm the leader of the opposition, and somehow it goes per se that I would have to strike on the weak points, this is not only the weakest point of our application to become a candidate status, but this is also the point in which Albania is going down and down in the eyes of the international community. And let's forget for a moment what we say or what we can say, and let's watch what the others say about us, what all reports, starting from the EU progress report, says about it. So it's out of imagination for the European Union to accept and welcome a country in which people are killed during a protest, and in which a deputy prime minister is caught, as it was caught here, seen everywhere, during a spectacular episode of corruption, and then watch how all these things end in the courts by everyone at the end being innocent, to understand that there is no room for the European Union to indulge on that. And more, I think it's very important to see and to understand that without elections that are free and are fair and are accepted like that, like being free and fair in international standards, again, is very difficult. But when we see all these things, and then we try to understand why the government need to touch the elections integrity, why the government need to respond violently by killing people, why the government need to deny and then to go through a falsification of a verdict on a corruption case like the one I mentioned. The reason is very simple, because the government is so deeply linked with corruption and so deeply corrupt that cannot do differently.
Would you say the Socialist Party doesn't have similar problems?
Look, the Socialist Party is in the opposition. Of course, we got in opposition after having been in government. And people of Albania decided to send us in opposition because they were not happy with the way that we governed, and corruption was part of it. But let's be frank, there is no comparison between the two. And the most important, today, I think we have taken our lessons, we have made our own reflections, we have made our own inner reforms, we have rejuvenated the party, and we have prepared it to face the challenge of a change by facing also the challenge of fighting corruption effectively. And ending with this question, I would say fighting corruption means modernizing the state, mean modernizing the institutions, mean modernizing the mechanisms that would not allow anyone to be the god of the destiny of the people that are knocking at the door of the state to ask what they deserve.
Well, let me jump in here. Do you think the international community, particularly the United States and European Union, should be more involved in combating corruption or helping Albania combat corruption, as well as the other issues you mentioned, alleged electoral fraud and so on and so forth?
This is a tough question.
That's why you're here.
This is a tough question because there are two sides of it. One side is what the international community and the European Union could have done better. And I'm sure that something could have been done better. To not close the eyes or to make relative problems, the problems that in fact are not relative. Free and fair elections is not a relative problem, and problems with elections cannot be relative, because then one has to face a chain of facts that goes one after the other towards a degrade of the institutional life. When somebody or a party or a coalition takes your votes, even when you don't give it, then it can do everything to you, because it doesn't depend anymore from you and from your power to change the situation. Now, there is also the other side. I think the international community has done a lot for Albania. I think the European Union has tried hard to let Albanians understand that you are welcome, but it's up to you. At the end of the day, it's up to us. It's up to the Albanian people to decide not only where we want to go, because this is clear, everyone wants to go towards Europe, and everyone wants Albania to be part of the European Union, but of the how we want to arrive there and in which speed. So,
but let me ask you, whoever wins the next election, I'm sure the majority won't be big enough for them to govern alone. There'll be some sort of coalition. They'll need cooperation in parliament. Ultimately, it would take both sides, both major parties, to cooperate on the most pressing issues, to make some compromises on the European program. Would you say now, as pre-election, whenever the election will be, that you'd be willing to compromise?
We have a record in any way. We have a record that is clear. When it came to help and to contribute for the accession of Albania in NATO, we were in opposition. And we took the initiative. And we asked firmly for a common effort. And we succeeded. So for sure, tomorrow, when we will have the majority to govern, we'll need to have a bigger majority to take tougher decisions. And for sure, we will be always willing to explore the possibility of doing it with the other side, but not like they are doing, by saying, we are here, and we cannot do anything because the opposition is not voting the laws. No, but by reaching the opposition and by being open and by asking the opposition, how can we make it possible?
Let me turn now to a question that's unavoidable, the future of Kosovo. You just came back from Pristina, you were in Kosovo, you were in the Preševo Valley in southern Serbia. How can this new country, in your opinion, succeed, given poor economic conditions, the faltering budget, slow progress in joining international institutions, and having a political leadership that's been criticized for some of the issues we've raised here? In other words, corruption, limited capabilities, even too much foreign supervision. And I have a couple of questions here. First of all, do you think EULEX should end its mission this year in Kosovo? EULEX being the rule of law mission. And let me jump in with the second one. Long-term solution to Kosovo. Would you envisage a solution to its internal and international problems by a full-scale union with Albania?
First of all, I might say that it was a long journey to win the war. And it will be a long journey to win the peace in terms of economic standards, of social welfare, and of a very good country for every Kosovo citizen. And of course, this takes again a challenge to modernize a state that is really very, very new and with no tradition, which is a big challenge. And I think one crucial point is very reassuring for Kosovo people and for their leaders. It's clear the future is in the European Union. And being part of this European Union dream and agenda, the work is easier because you don't need to invent the wheel. You just need to stick on priorities, to learn from other countries' experiences, and to really believe that there is no other way but a European future for Kosovo, as it is for Albania. On the other hand, I strongly believe that despite the problems, despite the shortcomings, despite also the frustration that is there as it is here, they've done an immense job. We should not forget where we were not many years ago. And for a state that is still a very little child, they have done an immense job. And I'm sure that they know what they do, and I'm sure that they'll face the challenges with the proper will, courage, and also wisdom.
And the links with Albania? The second part of my question.
I don't think that the greater Albania, as it was envisioned and perceived by them who didn't leave the 21st century, is an option. But I think that Albanians together, without borders, without any kind of constraint, under the sky of the European Union, is a real and very feasible vision and also project.
So no to greater Albania, but yes to greater social, economic and other contexts.
Absolutely.
Interconnections.
Absolutely, and more. A greater Albania in all these terms as part of a region that is part of it, is part of the European Union, and is part of a completely new era. We live in a different era. So we don't have any more walls. We have only nets separating countries and separating communities and separating people. So we need to adapt to this, and we need to see our union as Albanians as part of this new era, and to not fall back in old visions that were limited by their own time.
Well, as you know, there's still a lot of unresolved questions, even territorial minority questions and so on. And you went to one area where there's a sizable Albanian population in the Preševo Valley. I don't know if other Albanian political leaders from Albania have actually visited. Tell us a little bit about it. How were you received by the local population, by the Serbian authorities, and what is your diagnosis of the problems in Preševo?
The visit in Preševo was for me a very striking moment because of the very warm welcome of the people under the snow and with very low temperatures, and also the very touching segregation they live in. And it came just like that, that we need in this region to think about minorities as a potential of a brighter future, as bridges between different communities, as problems that should be solved by understanding that at the end of the day, minorities will always be a problem if they are not treated as everyone, but can be more and more the solution if they are treated as everyone. So we were preparing something to propose to everybody, and now we are strongly convinced that it's needed. An agreement of all countries in the region for minority treatment under every EU standard. Let's not forget that very lately, in this January, the European Parliament has stressed with very strong words the situation of Albanians in Preševa, and has underlined that this is unacceptable. But at the same time, it's not the only minority. We have the Serbian minority somewhere else, and we have other minorities everywhere. So these minorities can really be the solution for a brighter future of the region if the region engage to treat them as the source where the solution is, and not to go on with the segregation and with policies that have failed.
Well, how would you respond to the proposition that one sometimes hears, either from Belgrade or even some in Pristina, territorial exchange? In other words, northern Kosovo in exchange for Preševo as part of Kosovo.
First of all, I am in the line that we should be, behind Kosovo leadership. We should be behind Kosovo people. But we should never try to interfere with any kind of lecture or with any kind of, way that may hurt their own right and also their own duty. Second, I think that on one hand, Kosovo is a new state, is a state that is defined by its own territory, and the Kosovo state integrity cannot be subject of, discussions and of possible formulas of compromises that at the end would not bring anywhere. Why? Because it's not that by exchanging territories you solve the core of the problem. The core of the problem is how all these communities, all these ethnicities, all these states will jump in the 21st century and will jump all together in the European Union. How the life here in this region will be the same as in every region of Europe, and how the new generations will overcome all these burdens and all these obstacles defined by history, and defined by old walls, which are not just borders there, but which are also walls here.
You sound, let me ask you, you sound very optimistic about the European Union. There's a lot of people in the European Union and in America who are very pessimistic, at least about the immediate future of the European Union. Let me ask you a very specific question. And I asked this to the Prime Minister on my first show. Given the debt crisis, the sovereign debt crisis, potential looming recession, the problems now we're witnessing in countries like Greece, maybe in future in Portugal, Italy, other places, is the European Union, first of all, worth joining? What would be your message to the Albanians? And secondly, would the core European Union countries want Albania to join when it comes to the crunch? Very
complex question, and I thank you very much for the tough time you're giving to me. But
my pleasure.
I think there are different things in this question. First of all, Americans can be absolutely allowed to be pessimistic about the United States, but not Albanians, not others, because you live in the best country for anyone who wants to live in a vibrant democracy. Of course, you have problems. Of course, you need to face challenges. Of course, you also need time after time to change the way politics works. But I don't think that this can undermine in any way what the United States are. The same goes for Europe. It may be a bit different because on one hand, the European Union is facing the limits of its own by having lost somehow the balance between the soul, between the inspirational source that made possible the birthday of this incredible vision of the world, and the too much focusing on just monetary, financial, bureaucratic base of the Union. But it's a crisis that is a big opportunity to understand what is needed beyond the financial regulations to redefine the soul of Europe, to give to this Union what is missing from the vision of its founding fathers. Now, the other side of the story has to do with us, in your question. And for sure there is no other solution, and for sure there is no other option. And it's not about going in a station and then sitting down and then wasting all the money you can waste and then burn like the Greeks are burning. It's about building a piece of Europe here in our own country. It's about transforming Albania in a vibrant economy among European economies. It's about transforming Albania in a place where people can get healthcare, can get education, can get a job, can make their lives without feeling out of something, without feeling like being behind the walls, but being part of everything. So very shortly, I think the European integration for Albania is not just a goal. It's a way of being, a way of living, which should be different from now.
My very last question, I wish we had more time, but time is always pressing. How do you see America's role, not only vis-à-vis Albania, but in this region? Should it still be playing a prominent role, or should it give over more of the responsibility to the Europeans?
You know Albania from a long time, and you know that you are here in the most pro-American country.
South of Poland.
In the most pro-American country in the region, and maybe in a country that is more pro-American than many American states. But saying that, I think that without the United States, not only the region would not look like it looks today, but Albania would not be what it is today in terms of freedom, in terms of some safeguards that still exist and resist under the growing pressure of a government and the governance that is not fitting with the values and the principles that America promotes or that the European Union incarnate. So I would not put it like should be the United States here or should be the European Union here. I would put it like without the United States here, a European, Albania and Kosovo is not possible.
Edi Rama, thank you very much for a very lively and wide-ranging interview.
Thank you.
I'm sure we'll have you back at some point to discuss politics and world affairs. Thank you again.
We'll have elections at some point. I'll be back at some point, for sure.
Thank you for being with me. Let me turn now to our studio audience. What is on the minds of Albanian citizens? Today, we are happy to have with us students and professors from the Mediterranean University of Albania. Thank you all for being here. I'm sure you have many questions. Who is first?
Good evening. My name is Kriton Kuci. I'm a lecturer of political philosophy in the Mediterranean University of Albania.
Let me get closer so I can hear you.
Of course. Mr. Bugajski, do you think it will be easy for the Socialist Party of Albania to implement a social and left-wing political program in a time when the neoliberal wind is blowing through the European Union?
All sorts of winds are blowing through the European Union at the moment, some not so friendly. In fact, I would say it's more than a wind, it's a storm. How the local publics and politicians are going to react to such a storm, the financial crisis, the debt crisis, remains to be seen. As you know, the socialist program for social development, political development, has really in the past 20 years been sidelined, as you say, by the neoliberal project. But what is socialism now in the European setting? If you look at the programs here in Albania of the Socialist Party and the Democratic Party, there's not a lot of difference in terms of economics. I mean, maybe in the margins, but in terms of general policy prescriptions, there isn't a lot of difference. And it's the same throughout the European Union. So to implement a socialist program, in other words, greater state control, greater state interference, I don't think that's realistic unless Europe returns to some sort of protectionist nationalist model. And I don't see that happening in the near future. This crisis somehow has to be handled with the system that we have. It's going to be tough, and there's going to be some very hard times in terms of potential recession, but I think that's the only viable model that we have at the moment. Please, who's next?
Good evening from me as well. Emilio Cica, lecturer of political science at Mediterranean University of Albania. On Sunday evening, all the eyes of Europe, and not only, were in the Greek parliament. What do you think? What is the impact of the Greek debt crisis in the region, in the Balkan region, and especially in the real economy of Albania, taking into consideration that the majority of the immigrants, the Albanian immigrants, are in Greece?
Very good question. And if I hadn't done the commentary on Iran and Russia this evening, I would have focused on the Greek question. As you know, the Greek parliament has accepted, at least in principle, the stringent conditions for a new rescue package, without which basically the Greek economy would have gone completely bankrupt. And Greece would have probably been leaving the Eurozone and maybe even European Union. The implementation of the program is the tough part. The Greek government, unfortunately, for the past 2 years, has signed a lot of agreements, but has not implemented them. And going back to the first question, in many respects, Greece has a socialist economy. Strong unions, huge state sector, many companies tied to the state, but this is part of the problem. So that socialist model in Greece, in many respects, doesn't work. Trying to reform it is extremely difficult, and it will have repercussions. First of all, internally, in terms of Greek public opinion. We've already seen riots in the streets, a lot of public disaffection with the austerity measures. You could have now, with elections coming up in April, increasing support for a more extreme left or a more extreme right solution to Greece's problems, which would be tragic for the country, but equally tragic, I think, for the neighborhood. If you have, for example, a collapse of the Greek economy, this will have enormous repercussions for Macedonia, for Albania, for other countries where Greeks have a lot of business interests, or where a lot of Albanians work. As you know, a lot of Albanians do work in Greece. Remittances will shrink. People will be coming home to Albania, which has itself a poor infrastructure to be able to handle an influx. It will also have, I think, security repercussions, because if you have a more nationalist Greek government, this will reverberate, I think, quite negatively and create reactions in countries such as Macedonia, in countries such as Turkey, and in Albania. So I do not see a rosy future. I think the important thing is to try and convince the Greek voter that the only solution is to, as we say, bite the bullet and try and get through these very tough times to see the economy begin to grow. Because ultimately, an unstable Greece is bad news for the whole region. You want your neighbors to be well off. Please, who's next?
Yes, hello, Mr. Bugajski. I'm Emilia Jaffa from the Mediterranean University, student. My question is about the Social Party. In which way a possible victory of the Social Party may affect the EU integration of Albania?
The Socialist Party?
Yeah.
Which could be a social party.
Sorry, yeah, Socialist Party.
Socialist Party.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think, as I said at the outset, I don't think the programs are that different in terms of what's on paper between the Socialists and the Democrats, or even other parties that are in the coalition or in parliament. The big question is what happens when they're in government. And that's not always completely dependent on the government. It depends on coalition partners. Often it depends on a majority in parliament to pass the necessary legislation. As you know, there are conditions that the EU has laid out before Albania can receive candidacy status and move towards the European Union. Now, those have to be met by the Albanian government, whoever's in charge. And as we know, the leader of the Socialist Party, Edi Rama, has said that they're as committed to the European Union as are the Democrats. I don't think either party is anti-European Union, because that is the future. The question is always not in what people say, but in what they do when they're in government, and what they're capable of doing through parliament.
Thank you.
Please, who's next?
Hello, I'm Anissa Dalanga from...
Could you speak up a little bit? I'm sorry.
Can I speak up?
Just put the microphone
Okay.
closer.
I'm Anissa Dalanga from Mediterranean University of Albania.
I'm trying to see you.
Okay. My question is, how do you think a victory of Socialist Party of Albania will affect in the geopolitical developments in the region?
Again, it's a similar question. Albania is committed to joining the European Union. Albania has a very good record on promoting regional stability. In fact, it's the one country, I would say, in the region that doesn't have a specific dispute with any neighbor. If you look at the relationship between Greece and Macedonia, between Serbia and Montenegro, between Kosovo and Serbia, there are disputes. Albania has no outstanding disputes with any neighbor. And I would imagine that any government, whether it's socialist or a coalition or some other party, would not engineer any kind of regional insecurity. It's important to maintain that sort of equilibrium in the region, not to talk about things such as Pan-Albania, Grand Albania, Big Albania, not to disturb neighbors with any territorial demands or, let's say, combative demands for their minorities abroad. So I don't see that the socialists are going to make that much difference in terms of security. The only danger I see is if in a neighboring country there is destabilization, whether it's in Greece or whether it's in Macedonia, which we haven't really talked about, which could then provoke a reaction from Tirana in defense, let's say, of the Albanian population in a neighboring state. That I see more of a potential problem for Albania in the future, how to handle disturbances emanating from outside the border. But in terms of Albanian policy, regional security, I don't see that much difference really between the Democrat Party and the Socialist Party. Please, who's next?
Good evening. Andi Techa, student at the Mediterranean University of Albania. Mr. Bugajski, do you think that Albania will have a president, a consensual president after 1 year, and what will be his role in the political life of Albania?
Right. As you know, the position of the president in Albania is not a strong position. I wouldn't say it's a figurehead position, but it's really a parliamentary system. And there are different kinds of systems, as you know, in Europe. And there are pros and cons. There are good arguments to be made for that system. There are good arguments to be made for a stronger presidential system. But it's what works for Albania. The president hopefully will be a consensual candidate, that we won't have endless rounds of voting in order to elect, that they will be acceptable to both major parties and acceptable to the governing coalition. For Albania, it's important to have at least a figure that's respected both domestically and internationally, someone that can, let's say, voice Albanian aspirations, even though the president doesn't have a major policy role, and through charisma and character can maybe gravitate more, let's say, authority to the presidential office. Because quite frankly, at the moment, many in America don't know who the president is in Albania. I would like to see a figure who carries a lot of respect, who has experience, and somebody who is not partisan, somebody who has the interests of Albania above the interests of any political party. That would be don't ask me to name the person, but that would be the ideal candidate. Please.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I am Brisilda from Mediterranean University of Albania, Faculty of Economic Sciences, and my question is, do you think there is a possibility for general elections before 2013 in Albania?
There are always possibilities. Nothing is certain in politics. You know, oftentimes you can have a crisis. You can have a vote of no confidence. You can have a coalition falling apart. You could have some international crisis that the government may not be able to handle. I don't like to forecast too much in terms of when elections will happen and whether there will be early elections. Early elections aren't necessarily a good idea, though. If they create a problem in terms of the election calendar. Remember, when elections happen, several months out of the reform program, the European qualification program, have to be put aside because the focus is on getting elected. I think what Albania needs is an accelerated program of reform and condition meeting in order to qualify for candidacy for the European Union. So I wouldn't necessarily encourage early elections because that could actually delay that process.
Thank you.
Well, we've come to the end of question time. Thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to young people. We will be back. I'm sure you'll be back one of these days. Good luck in your studies. Thank you all for joining me, and thanks for great questions. Thank you to the studio audience for some very challenging questions. My closing commentary on a major regional or international topic this evening focuses on the March 4th presidential elections in Russia. The return of Vladimir Putin to the Russian presidency is presented by official propaganda in Moscow as doubly vital to the country's national security. First, it will allegedly protect Russia from internal turmoil generated by difficult economic conditions and disruptive public protests. Second, Putin will allegedly rebuild the post-Soviet space under Russia's management and remove unwanted Western influence that undermines the security of the Russian Federation. In reality, Russia stands poised between democratic transformation, public revolt, and national breakdown. The political structure created by Putin during the past 12 years is cracking, as the mass protests against forged parliamentary elections have clearly demonstrated. For the first time since the collapse of the Soviet Union, citizens are displaying open disgust with the ruling elite. They are anxious about the economy, angry over pervasive official corruption, resentful of political manipulation, and pessimistic about the country's future. Confronting a potentially embarrassing election in which he would fail to win the first round, Putin has two unappetizing choices: reform or crackdown. Limited police action no longer frighten the public, while the consequences of a whole-scale crackdown remain unpredictable. The Kremlin is anxious that mass repression or blatant election fraud could unleash more widespread revolt. Genuine political reform would mean dismantling the so-called power vertical that lies at the heart of Putinism. Democracy would necessitate severing the close connections between the KGB security network, the governing elite, and oligarchs loyal to the Kremlin. Both politics and capitalism would need to become competitive and free from clique control. To regain the presidential throne and restore his legitimacy, Putin has been reaching for the one card that has always served Russian rulers: the myth of external threat. He has charged Western capitals with meddling in Russia's politics. US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's criticism of the December parliamentary elections were denounced as a hostile act. And instead of launching a program of reform and modernization, which would ultimately weaken his own stranglehold over the country, Putin looks poised to manufacture new crises to demonstrate that he can defend a nation. And there will be plenty of opportunities for conflict with Russia's neighbors. The Obama détente with Moscow will also be seriously tested, as Putin pushes hard to extract more advantages for Russia. In particular, Moscow is demanding a free hand to reconstruct the sphere of dominance in the former Soviet Union, which Putin now styles as the Eurasian Union. Although such plans will be opposed by many of Russia's neighbors, they can also provoke conflicts that will enable Putin to mobilize nationalist and imperialist sentiments and justify his authoritarian methods. Unfortunately, we have already come to the end of the show. I have greatly enjoyed, as ever, being with you and my colleagues at Albanian Screen. Good night, everyone. Stay healthy, be productive, and remain optimistic. See you all next month. Miro Pavshin.